Order of the day number 2, Higher Education Legislation Amendment, Student Services and Amenities and Other Measures Bill 2009. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the honourable member for Indi.
Here.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As Shadow Minister for, amongst other matters, youth, I rise today to speak on this bill, the Higher Education Legislation, Student Services and Amenities and Other Measures Bill. And whilst the bill does indeed contain other measures, its primary purpose is to impose a new tax on the 1 million students attending universities across the nation. Whether the students are full-time, part-time, studying on campus or external, whether they have a need or not for the services and activities which the $250 fee is intended to prop up, they will all be hit with what amounts to a new compulsory annual $250 tax, equating to $250 million around the nation, taken from students who can least afford it. The opposition, Mr Speaker, will be opposing this bill at a time when students are doing it tough and the government is splashing around $42 billion, including money for the so-called education revolution. They're slugging students with a $250 tax. The bill represents a broken promise, surprisingly, by the Labor Party. No. Yes, Member for Casey, this is a broken promise encapsulated in this bill. Did the Labor Party promise at the 2007 election that it would introduce this tax? Did it tell students at universities that it would force them to pay $250? No, it didn't. In fact, it did the opposite. At a doorstep in May 2007, the then Shadow Minister for Education, now the Minister for Foreign Affairs, said, "I'm not considering a HEX-style arrangement. I'm not considering a compulsory HEX-style arrangement, and the whole basis of the approach is one of a voluntary approach, so I'm not contemplating a compulsory amenities fee." Mr Speaker, that was May, just 5 months before the last election was called. So not only did Labor not promise to introduce such a compulsory tax, the then Shadow Minister actually gave a commitment to a voluntary amenities fee. And what does the Minister for Foreign Affairs colleagues think of forcing increased fees on our university students? Well, the member for Wills said during a debate on the Higher Education Support Bill on October the 14th, 2003, he said, "But there is good news because Labor will not support any measures to increase fees for Australian students or their families. In my book, education is not about how much money your parents have." The Minister for Finance and Deregulation and member for Melbourne, Lindsay Tanner, said in that very same debate on the same day that the reality is that Australian students and Australian families have pretty much reached the limit of their capacity to contribute to their own education or their children's education. So before the 2007 federal election, the Minister for Foreign Affairs promised not to introduce a compulsory amenities fee, and the member for Wills stated Labor would not support any increase in fees for Australian students. And on top of that, we had the Minister for Finance state his belief that students couldn't afford to pay any more. Now, after the election, the Labor Party is introducing a compulsory $250 amenities fee. All this proves that any promises the Labor Party makes before an election are absolutely meaningless. They will say and do whatever they think will get them elected. The bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, as stated by the Minister for Youth and Sport, quote, will also provide universities with the option to implement a services fee from 1 July 2009, capped at a maximum of $250 per year to invest in quality support and advocacy services. And the Minister went on to say, universities that choose to levy a fee will be expected to consult with students on the nature of the services and amenities and enhanced advocacy that the fee should support. So, in other words, before deciding what types of services and amenities the university can spend its compulsorily levied fee, it's going to have to consult with students. And who will these students exactly be? Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think there'll be a very small group of students, a very small group of student politicians, and they'll be the so-called representatives of the student union who are elected by, at the very best count, 10% of the student population, more like 5% if you're at Sydney or Melbourne universities. So you can be sure that these student politicians will be representatives, definitely, of their own vested interests, the advancement of their own political careers, but certainly won't be representative of the majority of students on campus, because the majority of students on campus don't bother to participate in student union elections. And there may be some criticism from the other side of the House on that, but it is within the rights of tertiary students to attend a university and engage in whatever activities and not engage in whatever activities they may choose, including voting and being involved in student unions. In addition, the Minister, in an attempt to allay any obvious concerns about what such compulsory levied fees could be spent on, said that the bill prohibits universities from allowing the expenditure of any funds raised from a compulsory student services and amenities fee to support political parties or support the election of a person to the Commonwealth, state or territory legislature or to a local government body. But this clause is really meaningless. It leaves a whole range of political activities allowable, will allow the compulsory fee to be spent on a whole range of activities. It doesn't expressly prohibit funding of campaigns for or against political causes, campaigns for or against a particular legislation, or for and against any campaigns that the student unions themselves may run. Nor does the bill expressly prohibit the use of compulsorily acquired funds to be channelled to the student media to promote whatever cause they desire. In fact, this is expressly allowed under the guidelines. What's worse is that with these new student services and amenities fee guidelines, which are supposed to outline exactly what services may be funded by this new fee, the guidelines will be tabled as a disallowable instrument, but not until after the bill has been passed. So we're not quite sure exactly what form the guidelines will finally take when they're tabled. The bill doesn't prevent student money being taken out of allowable activities and diverted into other disallowable activities. And we saw this cross-subsidisation occur in Victoria when the then government introduced legislation similar in some ways to the current legislation that purported to limit the activities that could be funded, and they purported to do that by listing the activities. But what happened was that student unions could take money from an activity which was allowed to be funded by the compulsory so-called amenities fee, take the money and spend it on an activity that was not expressly allowed. So in other words, a student union could receive money to run a cafeteria, take money out of the till and spend it on political propaganda. Or the student union could receive money to provide administrative support and use that money to fund, for example, wages of someone employed to do that, but who in fact spends their time campaigning, for example, for the re-election of the union president. Or the student union could receive funds ostensibly to provide important services, but we all know how much of those funds can get eaten up by administration costs, and it's quite frightening when you look at some of these figures. Before voluntary student unionism, Monash University collected over $8.5 million in compulsory fees in 1 year, and a whopping 56% of that went towards administration costs. And one wonders, Mr Deputy Speaker, the range of activities that would be covered by a very imaginative and creative student union body that would classify all sorts of activities as administration costs. So we have a government who told the Australian people before the 2007 election that it wouldn't introduce a compulsory amenities fee, is now asking us to take them on trust, pass the bill, and then at some later date they'll introduce into the House the guidelines which outline how the new compulsory regime will work. as they never intended to stick to their promise of not introducing a compulsory amenities fee, they never intended to prevent political activities, causes and salaries from being funded